In the Library of Congress, a filing cabinet holds the voices of thousands of dead Americans. These are not audio recordings, but thousands of pages of handwritten and typed interviews collected between 1936 and 1940. During those years, the Federal Writers Project sent unemployed writers into homes across 20 states. Their only task was to record the life stories of ordinary people before they were gone. They gathered about 2,900 life histories. The documents were stored in the Library of Congress and sat mostly unread for nearly 40 years. I found them while researching 1870s architecture. I was puzzled why so many buildings had proportions that seemed wrong. The deeper I went, the more I realized the buildings were not the main story, the people were. These interviews captured something textbooks never show: the first-hand memories of Americans who lived before everything changed. Their stories often contradict the official history we learned in school. Before everything changed is easy to understand with basic math. A person born in 1855 who lived to 85 would have died around 1940. When the writers knocked on doors in the late 1930s, these elderly Americans could still speak. They had been children in the 1860s and 1870s. They witnessed a huge transformation in American life within one lifetime. Their grandchildren, born in the 1920s and 1930s, heard these stories directly. Today, those grandchildren are in their 80s and 90s, the last generation carrying oral memories of the old world. They are almost gone. Mary Kelly was born in 1851 in Michigan. She lived to 113 and died in 1964. She remembered life before the Civil War and lived long enough to see television in American homes. Maggie Barn, born in the early 80s, formerly enslaved woman, reached about 115 and died in 1998. These were not rare. A whole generation remembered to completely different worlds. The government could have recorded many more voices, but only collected 2,900. In 1939, the project lost funding, was handed to the states, and quietly ended. The interviews were boxed up and not made public until the 1970s. 30 years of silence around the last first-hand accounts of the old world. What exactly changed? The night of October 8, 1871, is hard to ignore. Most Americans know the Great Chicago Fire. Few know that on the same night, fires erupted across 3 states in the upper Midwest. In Peshtigo, Wisconsin, a firestorm destroyed the town in roughly 1 hour. It killed between 1,200 and 2,500 people. It was the deadliest wildfire in U.S. history and burned about 1.2 million acres. Survivors described winds that could lift adults off the ground, flames faster than a running person, and heat so intense that people in open fields suddenly burst into flame without touching fire. Reverend Peter Pernin survived by staying in the Peshtigo River. He wrote that oxygen was sucked away so fast. The fire created its own violent weather system, like an explosion, more than a normal wildfire. That same night, Holland and Manistee in Michigan burned, and Port Huron was threatened. Fires broke out across a huge area at the same time. The National Weather Service confirms the events happened simultaneously. Officials blamed drought, logging waste, and strong winds. But one detail has puzzled people since 1883, how everything started at once. Some suggested pieces of Biela's comet ignited the fires from the sky. Chicago witnesses reported strange blue flames in basements. The comet idea was never proven or disproven. For the elderly interviewed, in the 1930s, 1871 was childhood memory. A 70-year-old in 1938 had been only 3 that night. An 80-year-old had been 13 and remembered the red sky. The Library of Congress says the interviews include stories of the 1871 fires and pioneer life. But that is only part of it. What else did these witnesses remember? Why was the project stopped before more could be recorded? Fire was not the only loss. In 1890, the United States held its most detailed census ever. Nearly 63 million Americans were recorded with information on immigration, language, home ownership, and Civil War service. For the first time, no backup copies were kept in local offices. The entire record existed only in the basement of the Commerce Department. On January 10, 1921, a fire broke out there. About 25% of the records were destroyed, and much of the rest was damaged. The cause was never clearly found. The surviving records sat in a warehouse for 12 years with almost no effort to save them. In December 1930, the Census Bureau sent a list of documents to be destroyed to the Librarian of Congress. The 1890 census was on the list. The librarian found nothing worth saving. Congress approved destruction on February 21, 1933. The very next day, February 22nd, President Hoover laid the cornerstone for the new National Archives building, built to prevent exactly this kind of loss. Of nearly 63 million names, only about 6,160 pieces survived. The most complete record of Americans living through this transition period was largely erased through fire, neglect, delay, and official order. There were also the children. From 1854 to 1929, about 200,000 to 250,000 children were put on trains, sent west to rural areas. Called the Orphan Train Movement, these children were often displayed at train stops for farm families to choose. Many worked in fields. Fewer than half were true orphans. Most came from poor or immigrant families. Older children were often told to forget their past. Names were changed. Origins were rarely recorded properly. Many never knew their real backgrounds and could not pass the truth to their own grandchildren. Up to 250,000 Americans had their identities cut off by design. This happened in the same decades as the 1871 fires. The fading of giant photographs and the shift from grand old architecture to simpler modern styles. In 1893 came the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago, the White City. It attracted over 27 million visitors in 6 months. Nearly 200 grand neoclassical buildings with huge domes and fine details were built on about 690 acres. Officials said they were constructed in under 2 years using plaster and wood frames with only hand tools and horses. After 6 months, almost every building was torn down or burned. Only the fireproof Palace of Fine Arts survived. The same pattern: build magnificent structures, show them briefly, then destroy them, happened at other world's fairs. Some of the elderly people interviewed in the 1930s had visited the White City. They remembered walking through buildings that felt far older. It seemed like something ancient that was suddenly erased. Imagine a woman in the early 1950s, living in almost any county. Born in the late 1850s, she was over 90. She told them about buildings already old when she was young, though textbooks said they were new. She spoke of the night the sky turned red across 3 states, of trains carrying nameless children west, and of a world with different sizes, buildings, and knowledge. Her grandchildren nodded politely and changed the subject. Her memories did not match the textbooks. And textbooks always won in 1950s America. Literal writers project saved 2,900 of these voices from 24 states. But what about the other states? What about the thousands of old people never interviewed? What about the stories told at kitchen tables and deathbeds in the 1940s and 1950s that no one wrote down? Those stories reached grandchildren who are now very old. They are the last living connection to first-hand memory of the world before the Great Change. That connection is about to disappear. The timeline is clear and tight, 1850s to 1870s. Old world buildings with oversized doors and strange construction stood everywhere. 1,871 massive fires burned across 3 states on the same night. 1,890. The detailed census of 63 million people existed in only one place. 1890s. Photos and stories of giants faded. Maps changed quietly. 1,893. The White City was built, displayed, and destroyed. 1854 to 1929. Orphan trains cut the roots of 200,000 to 250,000 children. 1,921. Fire damaged the census records. 1,933. What remained was officially destroyed the day before the National Archives cornerstone was laid. 1936 to 1939. Writers rushed to interview the last witnesses. Then funding was cut. By the 1950s, the last people who had seen the old world were gone. Many grandchildren chose silence. The alternative story felt too big to face. The 2,900 documents still sit in the Library of Congress. They have been available since the 1970s and can be read today. They contain the memories of Americans born before the transition, written down carefully by government workers during the Depression. Has anyone read every page? Has anyone searched for the parts that do not fit the official story? The buildings, the fires, the proportions, the technologies that textbooks say never existed. The last Americans who remembered the old world have died. Their grandchildren are almost gone. But the written words remain in the archives. Archives do not forget. The buildings still stand as quiet proof. The documents keep what was erased elsewhere. Somewhere in those 2,900 transcriptions, the truth has waited almost a century for someone willing to read what the final witnesses actually said, instead of what we were told they should have remembered.